Good morning, Linda. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Morning.
Morning. So, could you briefly introduce yourself and your work?
So my name is Linda. I'm a children's book author. I'm a programmer. I'm an illustrator. And I try to make the world of technology more approachable and more colorful and more whimsical for the next generations of programmers.
And as you know, that most of our audience are software developers. So, what is it? What's the message that you're coming to them? You know, they spend most of their days programming. So, what is it you're hoping to spread?
I think I'm hoping to spread their enthusiasm and excitement towards code and sort of the beauty and joy of the craft we all fell in love with to the general audience. And sometimes we are our own worst enemy. I don't have a way of explaining what gets why are we so excited and joyful about programming, and hopefully also rekindling that excitement we first felt when we started programming in the audience.
And what made you excited? What was the thing that
a very human emotion. So I had tinkered with computers earlier, and I had tried out different things, but I think the first sort of monumental and big project I made with code was a website for my then crush in 2001 when I was 13 or 14 years old. And it was for the Vice President Al Gore at the time. And I had this teenage girl excitement and enthusiasm, and I learned HTML and CSS, but I very distinctly remember that I wanted to make a picture gallery of him, and first I would manually resize the thumbnails of the pictures, and then I was like, there must be like a more clever way, like a programmatic way of doing this, even though I didn't know the word at the time. So I stumbled into PHP, and that's how I started programming. So maybe like summarizing, programming for me has always been a tool of self-expression and problem solving, and something that allows me to project my own internal universe to the world. And still today I feel like that's the way I approached programming, and yeah.
And I'm really curious, so there was this step, you had this crush, you wanted to resize and you didn't know how to do it. Where did you find the information? Was it just trial and error, or where did you go?
So first I started in a very analog fashion. So I had a scrapbook of his pictures, and that forced me to like Google, and I think Google was already then back then, but maybe Alta Vista or Google or whatever, like try finding pictures of Al Gore. And then I decided that this is awesome, but this is only something that other people can see in my classroom, so I need something more. And I remember there was a page called Lisa Explains It All, which was like a very pink and like happy looking website with like HTML tags and stuff like that. And now that I compare like how to some extent easy and hard it is for young people to get into programming, in some ways I'm really happy, because like the amount of materials and videos and tutorials and Inspect Element alone like have made it so much easier for people to start learning new skills. At the same time, in some ways, the world of technology has become a lot more complex because you have so much choice, and there's just like all the frameworks and responsive mobile things and all of these things that you need to take into account. Make it a little less direct to be able to express yourself. And sometimes it's just easier to use Facebook or Pinterest or Tumblr. And that's kind of the mission that I want to make sure that the next generation also gets to experience technology as a tool of creation, not only as consumers.
I love that. So taking kind of ownership of it and actually being able to do what you want to do, as opposed to just kind of, I want to do this content. I give everything over to Facebook, Twitter, whatever, that you can actually do it yourself.
To some extent, I'm like really, really jealous to people who grew up in the 70s. I think there's like a similar jump from my childhood to nowadays, when people could actually touch transistors. Like they had this tangible experience of how can you take apart a radio or a computer and like replace different components inside of it. And you had also ownership over the work you did. And somehow these like glowing boxes are completely sealed from us, and we have no ownership or ideas how they work anymore. And my career kind of started with the learning to code like bandwagon that was ongoing at the time, like 4 or 5 years ago, and still is to some extent. But I feel like the whole realm of technology is far too important to be left only for technologists. And in that way, we need to educate people about how computers work and how code works and what are the ethical and moral dilemmas around, say, AI, how computers talk to each other, what is the internet. There's this wealth of questions that I'm sort of curious and interested in exploring from the perspective of storytelling and sort of just a very different perspective than they've been studied in the past.
Yeah, well, so many questions are coming up because I love what you're pointing to is that we are tool builders and technology is a tool, and as opposed to technology being the ends, is that we get so many people scared of technology, and what I get from seeing about your work is you're trying to bring kind of wonder and possibility and all these things into technology, so we can create or imagine I guess a better world.
Yeah, I think it's a lot about attitude and self-efficacy. It's funny how I work with kids a lot of the time, and I'd say around the age of 10 to 12, especially girls start to define themselves in a very binary fashion, meaning that, oh, I'm interested in fashion. It means that I can't be interested in technology. I'm interested in food. It means I can't be interested in math. And I think the most important thing we can do for the next generation is to show them that technology and code and computers are a way of expressing, like one more language to observe and study the world, just like crayons or philosophy or arts or I don't know, acting lessons could be. And like computers might be binary, but as humans we contain multitudes. We can be many things at the same time, and in order to sort of solve the big problems of the future, we need more diversity in the group of people who are using technology as a tool to make the world a better place.
Yeah, no, and I love that. And what I hear, like English has become, the language that communicate globally, in globalization or whatever. And programming is just a language to be able to communicate with people and be included in the creation of the future.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like I'm most inspired currently by history and like Seymour Papert and Marvin Minsky and all of these like luminaries who lived in the 70s and 80s. And I think there was some sort of a lucidity in the thinking back then when computers were far less complicated than they are nowadays. And the thing that inspires me most in my work right now is this very sort of obscure pedagogical movement from Italy around arts education called Reggio Emilia, and it's from 1940s or 50s, and the whole ethos of the school is boiled down to the idea that a child has 100 languages they can express themselves. But so often we as society and adults and teachers say that you have the language of reading and writing, and that's it. And I think technology offers you wonderful tools to express yourself and study the world. But often we tend to think that, coding is only for puzzle solving or the logically and mathematically abled kids who want to become engineers when they grow up. And this is not to say that the problem is in the technology field or in the programmers. I think it's when you say to a layman that, I study computer science, so often the idea is that, you're someone who studies the computer, who spends time thinking about how the computer works and studying like the internals of a computer, whereas like all of us who work in technology, we know that we use computer as a tool to study and solve the problems in the real world, whether they are problems in biology or physics or fashion or food industry.
And the school that you were talking about, because I've heard about it before, it's very community driven as well, isn't it? It comes from it's the whole community that is involved with the child's education.
It's a lot about democracy and city and participation and sort of like a public common goods type of thinking and ethos in there. And I think that's also a really important discussion when it comes to technology, because such a huge part of sort of the progress within technology is driven by large corporations at the moment. And I feel nostalgic about many things, but especially sort of the early days of the internet and the web. Those days are gone, and I don't think if there's a way for us to get it back anymore. And I think these are discussions that I'm really curious and excited to have also in Malmö.
Yeah, and also that curiosity, as you say, for people to discover it again. To keep falling in love back with their love. I guess it's because sometimes it can get too much about the output and producing this, that, and the other, and actually forgetting about how you can create something from nothing with code.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think then it really helps to go back to the basics and read the thoughts of John von Neumann or Alan Turing when again computers were much more simple and like less complicated, and sort of rekindle your own excitement and passion towards computing.
And what is yours? What is at the moment? What's the thing that's most exciting you?
What's the thing that's most exciting? I think AI, like everyone is excited about AI. I'm excited from a different perspective, like how do we make neural networks tangible and real, and how can we make them like understandable when even the computer scientists don't always understand what happens in these black boxes. So how can we make sure that this seemingly new, I know there's a lot of eras of AI, will be approachable and sort of something that doesn't scare necessarily people, but they feel empowered by it. So that's something I'm looking into a lot. And I'm still really excited about how computers work. Like I think it's such a mastery of human mind that we went from electricity to logic to like hardware to software to operating systems. Like this whole abstraction of a computer still blows my mind every day. So I'm really excited about that too.
Yeah, and I think that with AI and the new technologies, it's making us understand more and more actually that the most sophisticated computer out there is the human being, right?
Yeah.
Is the layers and the layers and the layers. And so when you look into the future, do you look at it from a kind of a fear perspective, or do you look at it from a an opportunity possibility perspective? Or maybe you can stand in both perspectives.
I think children's book authors tend to have a pretty optimistic idea of the world, and especially working with kids, I feel that I don't have the luxury of being pessimistic, because like I don't know, like for kids are a wonderfully rewarding crowd and looking forward. That being said, I think who was the Skiffy writer who said that everything that happens in technology before you turn 30 is natural and according to the world of the order of the world and just like everyday stuff, and then everything that happens within technology after you turn 30 is like unnatural and weird and scary and somehow suspicious. And I'm 31, so I'm sort of currently observing myself whether I'm making this like a change of paths from optimism to pessimism. We'll see what happens. I'll report back in a year.
Yeah, please do. And so because you have, as you say, the luxury to spend so much time with children, what are they seeing? What are they imagining? How are they seeing the world? Because actually it's, as you say, linking onto that thing before 30, they're the most important people. They're the ones who are going to reimagine what the world is going to look like in 20, 30, 40, 50 years' time.
So it's definitely true. I think societies get better when we invest in other people's kids, and somehow the idea that like our children are innately creative and they can do new things and imagine stuff, it's true. But I think kids also need a lot of support and sort of like an adult to be present in that world. And I was in London last spring, and there was a little boy who came to me and said, like in a very solemn voice, and like, Linda, what's going to happen to all of the jobs? Like, what kind of a job will I have in the future when robots take all of our jobs? And he was like 6 years old. And I think the parents had meant good by having a dinner conversation, but I felt like, like that's a pretty like hard place to become like very empowered and fearless towards technology. So the thing I would do with kids is I would listen to them. I would appreciate their ideas. I would support them, because oftentimes kids are very scared to like not know the right answer when we start with an exercise that deals with the future of computing or humankind or technology. And listen to them, make them feel that they are heard, support their curiosity and support a fearless attitude towards technology. And in the same way as we don't think that kids learn English by just being surrounded by English-speaking people all day long, we actually go through the trouble of teaching them grammar. We teach them how to write. We teach them how to speak English. We have them read classics and contemporary books. I think technology requires us adults to be present and not just to like feel that, kids will take care of themselves and they are so wonderfully curious and creative.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing, like the essence of your work, and see what this sounds like, but is to give the kids the tools to be critical of technology, so that they can actually use technology for what they want to create, as opposed to technology controlling them, and they kind of give their life over and just become a consumer and blah blah blah. Is actually having these tools that they are the creators.
Absolutely, and a lot of time I get criticism saying that, oh, like kids should be kids and they should run in the forest and they shouldn't spend time in front of a computer. And I absolutely agree with this criticism. I think kids ought to have these like original adventures and walk around in the cities, but that can happen also in the internet, and sort of being able to recognize what are the things as humans are good at and what computers are good at. When do you want to sort of have a digital tool and when do you want to have an analog tool to solve a problem is all part of becoming a sort of critical and creative citizen.
Yeah, and I love what you're saying there, because I think it's a mix of the two. But often technology can be used as kind of like a pacifier or a
Yeah.
number. It's like, okay, you've been outside or whatever, and I need some time as a parent, and here it is.
Yeah.
Watch something or do something. Whereas actually, what you're speaking to is that you've just got this magic box. Learn how to use it, because you can just create the world that you're imagining. Like you can get that
And
out in the real.
especially when it comes to kids under the age 7, I would be very wary of like giving them too much screens, and that's why the medium I mostly work with is pen and paper. So I write children's books of like physical, real books, and there's so much that happens between like a parent and a child when you read books for them or when you discuss topics together. And a lot of times parents come to me and say that, oh, like these exercises are pretty involved, like it requires a lot of attention from an adult. And I'm like, like that's the thing. You need to be present in these discussions and guiding these kids. Like technology is not a pacifier and you can't leave the kid alone with it. And then later in life, if they have this foundation where they feel confident and curious and strong and brave, they'll be able to use the actual computer and the actual internet and all of these things to create good things. But the early childhood years are, I think there's so much we learn about what it means to be a human at that point that I wouldn't mix too much of technology in it. But the attitude you learn early on.
I love what you're saying there, because it seems like you're taking it a step back. So as opposed to get on the computer, do all of this, it's actually come back together. We're going to talk about this. We're going to do all the skills to get you ready for when you do then go onto the computer.
Yeah, sure. One of my favorite exercises I do with kids is this one where we build a computer out of paper, and the kids get to know the different parts inside of a computer, the CPU and the GPU and the RAM and the ROM, and they cut them out of paper and they put them into the right places, and then they design applications for their computer, paper computer, and like imagine what kind of professions would need a computer or where could you use a computer. And these are the moments where I feel like, oh wow, like this is appropriate usage of computers for the little kids, and then they might go to the like actual computer and see how it's made from the inside. And it's more about developing that curiosity and fearlessness towards technology at an early age, as opposed to making sure that the kid knows how to use like a browser before the age of 7, or how to write a if-else statement in JavaScript. So yeah, it's a lot of these very human skills and attitudes that I'm teaching.
And I've noticed you're traveling around the world a lot, spreading this message, that you go to different places. So if you were to kind of summarize the message that you are kind of taking around the world at this moment, what would that be?
I think technology, a lot of the problems in the future will be technology problems, but we won't be able to solve those problems with only the engineering brain. So we need a more diverse group of people, whether it's based on gender, but it's also based on sort of perceptions and worldviews and attitudes and problems we want to solve to be able to make this world a better place. And one way of doing that is making sure that the materials we use to teach computing are more diverse. And myself, I'm working with stories and sort of imaginative play and crafting as one tool of teaching the next generation the skills of computing.
And are you noticing is the impact the same wherever you go in the world, or are you noticing different
So Hello Ruby has been translated, I think, into 22 different languages. So I'm starting to have a pretty good sense of different countries. It's surprisingly similar. I was warned before that, oh, you'll need to like modify the content to different markets and blah, blah. But stories are surprisingly universal, and people from very different cultures have enjoyed the book. I'd say, sort of as a stray observation, in Asian countries, parents are really involved in their kids' lives and really interested in technology education. So the series has been really popular over there.
Interesting. And so, how can the software developers in Malmö and Øredev, how can they support your message? What is it that you would like them to take from what you're going to be sharing with them, and kind of taking that out into the world?
So I do hope that computer programmers would talk more about their profession, and especially bring the passion that they feel towards programming into the classrooms or the communities or just the city they live in. So often when you look at a programmer, they just type in front of a screen and you can't see the thinking process. Whereas if you're a sportsman and you can celebrate the big failures or the big wins together as a community. And I think for a lot of kids and non-programmer parents, programming just feels very esoteric, very foreign, and celebrating those moments and sharing them is very important. So I hope that a lot of programmers would go visit classrooms around Malmö and Sweden and share sort of this enthusiasm they feel.
Yeah, there's a responsibility, right? That's what I feel, is that we need the people who understand this, who have got the magic to spread it to as many people as possible, because
Yep.
the more people that are understanding this, the more power that we have.
Absolutely.
So, well, thank you for your time. It's wonderful to talk to you. Is there a last words that you would like to finish this this
I have
conversation
this,
with?
yeah, I have this ethos or idea that kind of summarizes a lot of the work I do, and it goes somewhat like this: if code is the next universal language, instead of grammar classes, we ought to be teaching poetry.
I love it. I've got so many questions to ask you that we'll get a coffee
Beautiful.
in when you come
Yeah,
to Malmö.
let's do that.
Thank you,
Awesome.
thank you so much.